She stands at the edge of the vision, and the candle behind her does not flicker. It is the night of June 13, 1929, in a small chapel in Tui, Spain, and a young Carmelite nun kneels alone before the altar. Sister Lucia dos Santos, the last surviving seer of Fatima, now 22 years old, is not praying for anything she expects. She is simply keeping her watch. And then the ceiling above her disappears, and what opens in its place is something she will spend the rest of her long life trying to describe in words that will never quite be sufficient. She sees the Trinity. She sees the cross. She sees the Immaculate Heart of Mary, encircled with thorns, and from it a great light descends. And she hears a voice, the voice she first heard as a child in a field in Portugal, telling her that the moment has come, the moment God has been waiting for. The moment the Church has not yet answered. If you have found this channel, you are not watching by accident. Stay with us tonight. And if these hidden things matter to you, consider subscribing. There are many more. What Lucia heard in Tui in 1929 was not a vague spiritual feeling. It was, according to her own written testimony preserved in her memoirs, a specific and urgent request. Our Lady told her that the time had arrived for God to ask the Holy Father, in union with all the bishops of the world, to consecrate Russia to her Immaculate Heart. Not the world in general, not all nations in a sweeping gesture. Russia, by name, by the Pope.
For 400 years they kept this sealed. We gathered every prophecy they tried to bury into one book, written plainly, nothing hidden, nothing softened. If you want the whole truth, not the version they approved, it's pinned in the top comment. Get it tonight.
Together with every bishop on earth, in a public, solemn, united act. This was not the first time the subject had come up. 12 years earlier, in a dusty sheep field on the 13th of July, 1917, 3 shepherd children, Lucia, Francisco, and Jacinta Marto, had received what they later described as a vision and a message of terrifying clarity. The part of that message concerning Russia, which Lucia eventually wrote down in her memoirs at the request of her bishop in 1941, contained a conditional warning that has haunted the Catholic imagination for more than a century. If the requests are heeded, Russia will be converted and there will be peace. If not, and here the words carry the weight of something cold and enormous, she will spread her errors throughout the world, causing wars and persecutions of the Church. Read those words slowly. They are not vague. They identify a specific nation. They identify specific consequences. And they are attached to a specific condition, a consecration that, according to Lucia's account, must be made in a precise way, with a precise intention, by a precise authority. The debate that has grown around those words spans a century. It involves popes and councils and canonizations and controversies. It involves a woman who lived to see the Berlin Wall fall and died in 2005, still writing about what she witnessed as a child. It involves a question that has never fully quieted in the halls of the Church. Has the request ever truly been answered? That question is alive again tonight. And there is a new pope in Rome. To understand what the faithful are asking of Pope Leo XIV, you have to understand what was asked of his predecessors, and what happened each time they tried to answer. Pope Pius XI received Lucia's account of the 1929 Tui vision through her spiritual director, and the request was transmitted to Rome. The consecration did not follow in the form Lucia described as necessary. Years passed. The Second World War came. More years passed. Pope Pius XII consecrated the world to the Immaculate Heart in 1942 and again in 1952, specifically mentioning the Russian people in that second act. But critics of his approach argued that this fell short of what had been asked, because it lacked the explicit union of all the world's bishops consecrating Russia by name. Lucia herself, in letters that have been published and studied, expressed the belief that Russia had not yet been consecrated in the manner Our Lady had requested. This is documented. This is part of the historical record. She said it in writing. The Church and the world took note. Then came 1984. Pope John Paul II, who had survived an assassination attempt on the feast day of Our Lady of Fatima, May 13, 1981, was a pope personally shaped by what he believed the Blessed Virgin had done for him. In union with bishops across the world who joined him spiritually, he performed a solemn act of consecration in St. Peter's Square on March 25th of that year. The Vatican, in subsequent years, maintained that this act fulfilled what Our Lady had requested. And 5 years later, the Soviet Union began to dissolve. A wall came down. A world that had been divided since 1945 began, haltingly.
If your heart is heavy, that feeling is a grace, but don't stop at fear. We wrote the prayers to answer it. The rosary, the consecration, the protection for you and the ones you love. Don't face what's coming unprepared. It's pinned in the top comment. Get it tonight.
Imperfectly, painfully, to shift. Those who accept the 1984 consecration as valid point to those events as at least partial fulfillments of the promised effects. The Church held that the request had been answered. Sister Lucia, in a letter written in 1989 and in a 2001 interview, indicated that the consecration had been made as Our Lady desired. And yet, and this is where the debate does not end, there are those who read that letter differently. There are those who look at Lucia's earlier writings, at the precise conditions she articulated before 1984, and who argue that the later statements represent something other than her genuine and uninfluenced conclusion. This position is held not by fringe voices alone, but by serious theologians, by priests, by scholars of Fatima who have spent decades with the original documents. The Society of St. Pius X, the Fatima Center, and other traditionalist communities have maintained that the consecration as requested has never been validly completed, because it was not Russia alone that was named, because not all the bishops of the world joined simultaneously in the act, because the conditions of the original request were not met in their fullness. This is an honest disagreement. It is not a conspiracy. It is a debate inside the Church between people who love the Church and who are reading the same documents with different eyes. Then came March 25, 2022. Pope Francis, in the shadow of a war that had broken out in Eastern Europe just weeks before, performed another act of consecration, this time naming both Russia and Ukraine explicitly in St. Peter's Basilica before a statue of Our Lady of Fatima brought from the sanctuary in Portugal. Bishops around the world joined him. The prayer was solemn. The intention was clear. The Vatican said that the act fulfilled the Fatima request. Cardinal Krajewski, the papal almoner who had visited Ukraine during the conflict, called it a moment of profound spiritual significance. Traditionalists were not convinced. The Fatima Center issued a response stating that the consecration, though moving and sincere, still did not meet the specific conditions laid out in Lucia's account, particularly the condition that it be Russia alone, not Russia and another nation together, and that all the bishops of the world must gather in a unified public act. Others pointed out that the geopolitical situation had grown darker, not lighter, after the act. The war continued. The peace promised in the Fatima message had not followed. Both sides of this argument remain active. Both read Lucia's own words. Both love the Immaculate Heart, and neither can simply be waved away. This is the world into which Robert Francis Prevost stepped on May 8, 2025, when he emerged from the Sistine Chapel and took the name Leo XIV. He became Pope at a moment when the appeals about Fatima's unfinished business were already in circulation. Petitions signed by hundreds of thousands of the faithful, letters from bishops and lay people and priests, voices from Argentina, from Poland, from the Philippines, from the American heartland, all carrying the same request. Pope Leo XIV, they write, please hear what the faithful are asking. Please do what heaven asked. Please consecrate Russia, Russia alone, Russia by name, to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, in union with all the bishops of the world, in a solemn public act. Please do not let this request sleep another generation. At least one active petition, circulated by the Fatima Center as of 2025, gathered signatures specifically addressed to Leo XIV. An appeal circulated through Catholic social media asking him to take up the question anew. Whether he will respond and how remains unknown. He has not, as of this writing, made any public statement on the Fatima consecration question. His pontificate is young, the request is old, and the faithful who carry it are patient but not silent. What drives them? What makes a Catholic grandmother in Wisconsin, or a retired schoolteacher in Lisbon, or a young father in Krakow sit down and sign a petition to a pope they have never met about an apparition that happened more than 100 years ago? The answer lies in what Lucia wrote. The answer lies in what that warning said would happen. She will spread her errors throughout the world, causing wars and persecutions of the Church. That phrase, Russia's errors spreading through the world, has been interpreted in many ways across many decades. In 1941, when Lucia first wrote it down, those errors were understood to be the errors of communism, atheism, materialism, the violent suppression of religion, the forced reshaping of human society around an ideology that denied the soul. The Soviet Union was, at that moment, in the process of consuming Eastern Europe. The Church in Poland, in Hungary, in Lithuania, in Czechoslovakia, in Ukraine itself was being strangled. Priests were imprisoned, seminaries were shuttered, families were divided by informants. Children were taught that God did not exist. For Catholics who lived through those decades, the Fatima warning was not an abstraction. It was the front page of the newspaper. It was the knock on the door at midnight. It was the bishop disappeared and never returned. The promise attached to the warning was equally concrete. In the end, Our Lady's Immaculate Heart will triumph. Russia will be converted, and an era of peace will be granted to the world. Not a vague spiritual peace, a real historical peace. A change in the world that human beings will be able to see and measure and live inside. That promise is what the faithful cling to. That is what drives the petitions. Not despair, but the certainty that the promise is real and the conviction, for those who hold it, that the condition has not yet been met. They look at what Lucia wrote in her memoirs, set down before any political pressure had been applied to the question, when she was simply a nun writing at her bishop's request about what she had seen and heard. They look at the specificity of the request, they look at the documented history of each attempted consecration, and they conclude that the road is still open, that the act is still possible, that the triumph is still coming. And they look at the new man in Rome. Leo XIV did not choose his name carelessly. No pope does. Leo is the name of 13 popes before him, and it carries a particular weight in Catholic memory. Leo XIII wrote Rerum Novarum. Leo the Great turned Attila back from Rome. The name invokes authority, clarity, and the willingness to act in moments when the Church must speak whether the world wishes to listen or not. Whether Pope Leo XIV will turn toward Fatima, whether he will receive those petitions and weigh them, whether he will engage with the consecration question in any formal way, none of this is known. It would be dishonest to claim otherwise. To say that he is prophetically destined to consecrate Russia would be to reach beyond what the evidence supports. The faithful who are writing to him are not making prophetic claims. They are doing what Catholics have always done. They are bringing their deepest hope to the man who sits in Peter's chair, and they are asking him, with all the reverence they possess, to listen. What Lucia wrote is not lost. It sits in the archives. It has been published. It has been translated into dozens of languages. Millions of people have read it. The message is not hidden anymore. The question is not whether the warning was real. The question, the old, unresolved, painful, hopeful question, is whether the answer has been given. And on a night like this one, in the quiet that comes after the evening news has been turned off and the house is still, there are Catholics across the world who pick up their rosaries and begin again. They are not defeated. They are not frantic. They are simply faithful. They believe that the Immaculate Heart was promised a triumph, and they intend to live long enough to see it. They believe that the woman who appeared in a field in Portugal in 1917, who appeared again to a kneeling nun in Tui in 1929, meant every word she said. And they believe, quietly, stubbornly, in the way that faith survives every disappointment, that the story is not finished. The consecration has not come yet, they say, not in the form that was asked for. But it can still come. There is still a pope in Rome. There are still bishops across the world who could gather in a common act. There is still an Immaculate Heart that was promised to triumph. And there is still, somewhere in a chapel with candles that do not flicker, a woman kneeling before an altar, waiting for the answer she saw in a vision more than 90 years ago. The request has not been forgotten. The promise has not been revoked. The Immaculate Heart still waits, and so do we.